Morning to one and all the pretty women and men, handsome men who've joined today on this beautiful morning of Women's Day 2021. The theme for this year's International Women's Day celebration is challenging yourself. And today we have wonderful speakers who have come together to share their thoughts and insights and to help us all shape our lives and also help us and empower us as we go onward on our journey. Without any further ado, let's begin today's program. To begin with, I'll invite our dear director, Dr. Dilip Mavlankar sir of the IPH family to please address us with his opening remarks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Starry, and welcome to all of you participants as well as our esteemed speakers on this International Women's Day. As you know, IIPH is the first public health university offering Masters of Public Health and Masters of Hospital Administration courses. And we are delighted to see that over the years, more and more women have been joining our courses, and almost 60-70% of our class is composed of women. If you look at the history of International Women's Day, some people may be talking about, so I will not mention much, but it started out of American Socialist Party, which held its convention in 1901. And there was discussion, and earlier there were movements of women's organizations, working women's rights, and overall women's rights, and including political and social rights. And out of that, this whole study, idea, and international movement began to improve women's overall condition in the society and give them equal status. And earlier, this type of day was celebrated in the Russian Federation, Russia, from the labor movements, and later on in Europe and in USA. And in the 1960s, first it started as a National Women's Day in some countries, and later on in 1960s, UN decided to make it International Women's Day. Of course, it doesn't mean that rest of the days are not women's days. Women are there in life everywhere and increasingly participating in all types of activities within the house, outside the house, in the political arena. And as you know, India has been quite progressive in giving 33% reservation for women in political spaces, especially in the panchayat and municipal corporation elections. So that has started a movement. Of course, it is a long way to go. Still, women have a different status in the society than what men enjoy. But with all of our efforts, I'm sure we can develop a more egalitarian society for men and women to work together. In the Scandinavian countries, women's equality is much, much higher. And we have had the chance to work with Sweden, and we have seen how in various spheres of life, women take leadership role in those countries. And those countries have one of the highest social development indicators because of that. So as we celebrate today Women's Day, we should keep in mind that we have to all work towards equality and improvement of the status of women. With that, let me again welcome all of you and thank our eminent panel of speakers, and special thanks to the PHFI team for suggesting this, that we do it jointly with PHFI and IIPH. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, Definitely, sir. The theme for this year is in itself that bringing the equality and challenging and taking up challenges and empowering we as women, fixing each other's crown. Thank you so much, sir, for the insightful note. Moving onward, I'll now invite Dr. Veena Iyer, ma'am. She is the one who has been helping us in coordinating this wonderful event. She is the Associate Professor, IIPHG, and she'll be helping us in setting up the context for today's celebration. Over to you, ma'am. Ma'am, you are on mute. Can you please unmute yourself? Yeah.
Thank you, Starry, and thank you, Dr. Mavlankar. So we are here to celebrate International Women's Day. This day is celebrated every year to recognize and acknowledge women's contributions to history and culture across the globe. And as Dr. Mavlankar already said, it was first observed in the US in 1909, and it was a protest by women at that time in some kind of garment industry, and they were protesting for better working conditions. There were some 15,000 women who marched the streets of New York. But for it to become entrenched as a day, it took another 70 years. So it is only in 1975 that UN declared it as a Women's Day, and we have been celebrating this day every year for last 45 years now. Well, before that, the period between 1909 to 1975 was one where the feminist movement took root, became stronger. And that century has seen a lot of churn, and a part of the churn was also in India, of course. And women are so intricately connected to everything in life, being half the population of the globe. This has had a effect on all of us, and this is one ism which is quite complicated. So I wanted to share a short video with all of you, which sort of brings out this historically complex situation for us. So are you all able to hear it?
Ma'am, it's not that audible, ma'am.
It's not audible. It's not audible at all?
Yes, ma'am. Cannot hear it.
Strictly speaking, the term feminism actually enters our vocabulary around the second or third decade of the 20th century. So the context of the 19th century is broadly the social reform period. Raja Ram Mohan Roy and all these figures, men mainly, took on what were thought of as social evils: sati, widowhood, child marriage, female infanticide. In fact, it was the British who often pointed out how backward we were. Sometimes, of course, is very hypocritical because they didn't have any good laws for women in their time. But nonetheless, it was part of their quote-unquote civilizing mission. By the end of the 19th century, imagine a situation where, on the one hand, you have a national movement telling the British to leave. And on the other hand, you have people petitioning the very same British state saying, we want to raise the age of marriage of our girls, we want to make female infanticide a crime, and so on and so on. So these nationalists told the reformers this is not the time to be going in for reform. But more interestingly, what they also said was, we need to have symbols. We need cultural symbols of the nation that is uncolonized. And where did they go for one of their most I think, active, most potent cultural symbols, no surprises here, it was women. So they thought of the woman, the Hindu woman in the home, who was not to be seen outside, who hadn't sort of fallen afoul or been subjected by British rule. The women were pure. They would be the right kind of symbols of the new nation. This woman as bearer of Indian culture was a very patriarchal construct. Nationalists, for instance, were praising child marriage, saying it's a wonderful Indian custom. You can imagine the kind of fraught relationship, the kind of tense relationship that would result when women want to continue to petition the British state, saying we want to raise the age of marriage. We don't think it's a wonderful Indian custom, which is what these early social reformers, these women did. This is why when feminism becomes the name of the women's movement, feminists are frequently accused of betraying the nation, of not being Indian enough, because they thought it was somehow associated with being Western. And to be a good Indian woman was to be non-Western in terms of what made for this very interesting, peculiar, and somewhat unique to India kind of relationship between feminism, Indian culture, and the nation.
Right. So my point in showing this video to all of our young students was to bring out the fact that it's very difficult for us to take sides. One is, of course, that this is very old, that much before many of you were born, we have been in this self-determination mode, trying to say who are we, what are we, that we matter. But at the same time, you also understand that it's a very wide and broad field. Many of you may not agree with everything that this Professor John said. So we are also in a way finding our way, because it's in our personal lives that a lot of these things get worked out, and then we make our opinions based on that. So this is just for you to understand that there is a lot more to it than what is happening, just in your time period. So Women's Day does bring an opportunity for all of us to look back on the progress that women have made in all walks of life. We have made considerable progress, and today we have a stellar panel of speakers to address you on topics that emphasize the complexity in women's lives today. I hand the mic over now to Starry to invite our speakers, who will enlighten us with their insights into how best we ought to navigate the psychological, social, and physical spaces that peculiarly affect us as women today. Starry, please take over.
Thank you so much, Veena ma'am. Now I'll take this opportunity to invite our very first esteemed panelist, Dr. Neelam Behre. She is a psychiatrist and a mental health epidemiologist. She has conducted numerous lectures and workshops on stress management, suicide prevention, workplace mental health, and awareness about substance abuse. Her area of work is mental health and clinical psychiatry. And today, my dear friends, she'll be addressing on the topic, developmental aspects of women's mind. Also, my dear attendees, if you have any questions that you would like to ask, you're please requested to enter your questions in the chat box. We'll be happy to address towards the end of the session. Please, Neelam ma'am, take over.
Thank you, Starry. Thank you, IIPH, Dr. Dilip sir, Dr. Veena ma'am, for this wonderful opportunity, and what a great day to start with. International Women's Day, and I'm here with the responsibility of compiling this very vast topic of what exactly is meant by development of a woman's mind, a woman's psyche, and how it develops. Well, it's a very difficult topic, but when I talk on this topic, I remember a wonderful story. So it's, I hope everybody likes stories. This story is a research story. It's an Ethiopian story. Yeah, it says it's a gift box. So what happens is there was a village in Ethiopia which was totally laptops, computers, cell phones, no internet connection, nothing was available in these villages. And what our researchers thought that we will drop in some gift boxes in this village. And these boxes were filled with laptops, computers, mobile phones, and calculators, all these electronic gadgets with no instruction manuals. And then they thought, let us see what happens. They were curious to know what happens. So the moment they dropped these boxes in this village, children around gathered by the boxes, and within next 4 minutes, they unboxed it, they opened the gadgets, and they were able to switch on and off the electronic gadgets. Surprisingly, again, in next 5 days, they were using over more than 40 apps, and they were singing the songs that were already pre-fed by the researchers. Moving on to the next 5 months, these children, without any instruction manual or without any briefing to these electronic gadgets, were able to hack the operating system so that they could reboot the camera because the camera was not functioning. So surprising enough, what I meant to say is when children learn anything, it's a dual process, a process which involves child's inherent property of taking up things as well as their environmental stimuli that they receive. It's a complex dynamic interplay of environment and a human being. And of course, when it comes to women's development, it is even more a complex process because this environment has a greater role to play when it comes to a woman's developmental mind or psyche. So let me try and compile this into within a short time as to how a woman's mind develops. Let us take, for example, a schemata of concentric circles. Let's keep a baby girl in between at the center and draw concentric circles, 3 circles. The innermost is the inner circle. We'll talk a little bit about this. Now, why this inner circle is most important and who constitute this inner circle, who are there in this inner circle? It's mostly your parents or your caregivers, the primary caregivers like your mother and father. Now, it is important to understand that there is very, very, very peculiar kind of relationship that a mother shares with a baby girl. The mother identifies herself with the baby girl and the baby girl identifies herself with the mother. So there's a kind of reciprocal identification. So how a mother looks at herself determines how confident or how the baby girl would be raised with self-esteem. And that is important, and that is how trust is formed. A basic trust is formed between parents and a child. You're a baby girl. Not just mother, but also fathers. How fathers respond to the needs of their daughters, the baby girls, again, is important. How they reciprocate things and how do they build in trust and self-esteem within these baby girls is important for development of trust, self-esteem, a connectedness. When you develop trust, you develop a connectedness. You confide in someone and you are able to share your secrets, and that is a basis of strong relationship, bond forming, and that is how parents identify themselves and bring in these qualities in a child, in a baby girl. Let us see. So that is why a lot about women's identification starts with parents identifying themselves and with the child. Moving on a little bit to a little more, little outer circle, say peers. We all know, we all are under peer influence, which is not always bad, but many times good as well. To know a little short fun fact. We all know that as children grow, there is a tendency of gender identification and mingling with the same gender group. So if boys mingle with boys and form group amongst boys with boys play, it usually happens sometime around 6 years. This same mingling with same gender in women occur in age as early as 3 years. So if you see this mingling together and being with each other and being cohesive with each other with the same gender, of course, starts much earlier in women. Now, what does that emphasize? That emphasizes that let us say you must have known that women gossip a lot amongst each other, which is not a bad thing. So we gossip, we validate each other, and we stay strong together. Rarely you must have seen a woman mocking other women. Why does this happen? So even if we relate with our groups strongly, we don't discard other groups, or we don't discard other women. We don't disregard them, or we don't mock them actively. So this peer cohesion is something that develops sometime in the middle age, where we are getting off from our parents and mixing up with the peers, wherein empathy to our peer members, perspective taking, understanding and developing compassion towards each other develops. And this happens a lot due to this second circle of peers and friends and school groups and college groups. And this is how cohesion between peers, cohesion between small social groups are formed. This cohesion, if you see, are more compassion based, emotion based in women as compared to those of men. And that is why there are stronger memories formed, there are stronger bonds formed. There is more there is more propensity towards helping each other, and that is a special attribute to women, I must say. Moving on to the outer circle of society, by and large, I'm sure I today I don't want to talk much about the harsher aspects of how society influences women. Societal practices influence women, like discrimination, race, violence, sexual violence, intimate partner violence. I'm not going to talk about that. I want to focus a little bit about the subtler aspects of how societal practices influence women. I would like to quote an example of elephants here. I feel that we learn a lot from animals. If you look at women, if you look at elephants group, you'll see that there is an alpha woman in an elephant group. So these are women who are passive, who are down-toned, but rule the group. So all those who conform to this passive, helping each other, understanding rather than mocking and fighting with each other kind of group, they stay in the group. And if you look at those certain males or those group members who are not conforming, a little bit aggressive, and they are not going with the group, are then sidelined, sidetracked. So why is it important to quote an example here? Because when you stay in society, we know we do have compromises. We have some societal norms in which we stay. A lot of this gives rise to resilience where mild to moderate stressful events in turn increase our capacity to adjust with the surrounding, to adapt to this environment. And this is how we become resilient to the forthcoming stresses. The same goes with conformism, where we conform it. Of course, conformism often is taken in a bad note, but there are goods and bads of everything we know. So being in society makes us conform with the society. Now, the opposite pole, the negative end of this, let me quote an extreme example of learned helplessness. We must have, this is an instance in everybody's home where, you are siblings of 12, 13, 14 years old, and a guest arrives at your home. So what usually happens, the parents make the boys sit in front of guest and have a conversation, chit chat with the guest. And they ask the girl to go back to the kitchen and fetch a glass of water, although they are of same age. These subtler things that are based on societal norms are instrumental in forming how a woman behaves in a conformed state. Sometimes it gives rise to learned helplessness. So where we know that we are able to help, or there is help available. However, the woman, the girl, has never learned that help could be sought, and she can escape from this, let us say, tyrannical or troublesome environment or situation that she is in. So resilience, conformism at its place, but learned helplessness at its negative end are often detrimental. And that is why we see all the ill effects, all the issues that women are facing are not because they don't have abilities, but because they are conformed, they are conditioned in society, they are brought up in society in such a way that they give up doing these things, or they don't have enough confidence to do these things. So summarizing, what I want to say is that it's not a point, it's an entire globe, it's an entire circle, these concentric circles which determine how a woman develops. And everyone in this circle of a woman or a baby girl is accountable as to how they bring up this baby girl into a successful woman. That's it. Thank you. That's all from my end. I'm sure this is a vast topic. It's difficult to compile it into some minutes, but if you have any doubts, you can later ask me in the chat box, or Starry can't take it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for this enriching experience on concept. The peers and the people whom contact with a woman so instrumental in developing. Thank you so much, ma'am, for this enriching experience and your sharing. Now we'll move on to our second panelist is Miss Pragya Lodha. Pragya is a psychologist based in Mumbai and works with 8 national and international organizations. She has worked extensively at millennials youth bracket. Her area of work is she is a clinical psychologist. And today, dear all, she's going to address us on the topic of social aspects of women's mental health. Dear Pragya ma'am, over to you.
Thank you, Starry, and thank you to the entire team of IIPH and PHFI for organizing this wonderful event. And good morning to all the attendees present here today to celebrate the International Women's Day. I will just take a moment to share my screen, and unfortunately will have to put my video off since there's a bit of a connectivity issue, but I should be connected with you through my audio. So allow me a moment, please. So as Starry mentioned, the topic that I'm going to cover is the social aspects of women's mental health. Dr. Neelam has very aptly, precisely covered the developmental aspect of understanding women's mental health. And I'll be taking it forward to cover the social aspects from here on. The first and the most important thing to understand when we're trying to understand what are the social factors or the social aspects of understanding women's mental health, it's crucial to remember that mental health does not exist in isolation. We as people, whether men or women, are constantly interacting with social systemic stakeholders at every point of our time in our lives, constantly. So I would like to begin with World Health Organization's definition of mental health that states that mental health is a state of well-being in which every individual realizes their own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, and can work productively, along with being able to make fruitful contributions to their community. So the definition of mental health in itself tells about how crucial is our interaction with our society, and us being human beings, also called as social beings, constantly keep engaging with the social factors and the society around us. Thus, social aspects of mental health are far more superseding to understand how mental health overall affects us as well. A very common question that is met with, in fact, when we're talking about, either gender and mental health or just mental health or women's experiences in mental health, is that do men and women experience mental health problems likewise? Most often, you will find out that literature says that the kind of mental health problems or the kind of psychiatric illnesses that are diagnosed in men and women are pretty much the same. However, there is almost always an incidence that there are certain sorts of psychiatric illnesses or mental health challenges that women face far more as compared to men. The answer lies in recognizing 2 factors. One is the biological makeup of the female body, and second is the social aspects or the social factors that interfere and influence the way how women experience mental health. This is a small representation and a gist to give you an idea the increased predisposition that women have to experience mental health problems. Right from their risk to attempting suicide, to experiencing eating disorders such as anorexia or bulimia, to developing depression and anxiety disorders almost 2 times more than as compared to men. Even the incidence of post-traumatic stress disorder is higher in women as compared to men. And alcohol dependence, which is considered to be a very male-dominated issue in society is also experienced in women, though less recognized. So moving forth, what is it really that affects women's mental health? What are the factors, especially embedded in our social structures, that go ahead to influence women's mental health by increasing their predisposition to psychological problems? Some of the most common factors are represented on this slide, where it begins with our history of patriarchy that we have had as a global community that subjects women to be looked upon as secondary citizens. And most often, we also see a lot of times that how women themselves internalize them to be secondary or subjective to second-class citizenship. So most often, I think an example that I would like to share, which is extremely powerful, that comes to my mind is where there was a domestic help in one of the households who didn't come for 2 or 3 days to work without any notice. And the fourth day, she turns up with a couple of bruises on her eyes and her arms and, other parts of her hands. So the landlady asked her that, what happened to you? Why didn't you come? And, what are these bruises all about? So she said that it was her husband who beat her up, and, that's why she couldn't come, because she was in so much of pain. And a little bit more into talking, where she also says, but, this is what I deserve. Matlab, in Hindi, if I have to put it, and if you all follow, she said that, मैं क्या कर सकती हूँ, मेरे पति अगर समझते हैं कि मैं उन्हें खुश नहीं रख पा रही हूँ, तो ये सब तो मुझे सहना पड़ेगा. This is exactly what internalization of patriarchy or internalization of misogyny sometimes can really look like. Apart from the patriarchal holds that the society has, which has led to, I wouldn't say it has only disempowered women. I think it has disempowered men as well in a lot of ways, which go unnoticed a lot of times. Another very crucial factor that goes to influence women's mental health in a negative way is sexism and gendered stereotypes, where we constantly view women to do certain things, to not do certain things, to appear a certain way, to be responsible for a certain things. And it begins right from our childhoods, the color preferences we have, the toys that we play with, the kind of games we play with, the kind of behavior we engage in, the kind of clothes we wear in. Everything is supposed to be boxed or compartmentalized to be that of a stereotypical woman. Another factor that predisposes women to negative mental health or poor mental health is the multiple roles that women are expected to play in the society. A complete woman is not a woman until and unless she's serving at home and she is working at the office as well. And she's expected to be successful at both the places. She's also supposed to be very okay with the abuse and the violence that is subjected to her, considering that she deserves to be served that way in case she does not fulfill the demands of being an ideal woman or a perfect woman or a good enough daughter, daughter-in-law, wife, or any other role that society expects the female to play. Another status of the woman is that of the carer status, where the woman is constantly expected to be the caregiving one, to be assuming the role of a caregiver in every situation, no matter how occupied she is, no matter even if she has to give up her goals and aspirations and dreams for it. And lastly, I would like to also point out that how low socioeconomic status and the low status of jobs that women are given are also constantly predisposing women to experience poorer mental health. Now, these are all factors that may not directly lead to causing mental health problems, but they do add to become very potent factors to leading to women feeling inferior, to feeling less confident, to feeling less good enough, not being able to do good enough, not being able to be a perfect mother or a perfect, person working at the job, or a perfect sister or a perfect wife, and constantly doubting and questioning oneself about their identities. What's also interesting is that there have been a couple of studies which have spoken about that how even the social position, or if the woman is the higher earning member as opposed to the male counterpart, can sometimes become conducive to her negative mental health because she's ill treated, because just because she has a better social status or because she has a better socioeconomic status as compared to her male counterpart. Another factor very important is the gender identification. Even women in the LGBTQ community, women who are single women, separated women, widowed women, are yet more marginalized within the subsect of women population and continue to face a lot more troubles. Something that Dr. Behram also mentioned was that women tend to take a back seat when it comes to seeking mental health. Though they have the social ability to take health, but in the family setup, the woman is usually the last one to eat the meal, the last one to do something for herself, and the last one to even get treated for better health. So how is it that we as society can actually support women's mental health? I'm not going to talk about the major stakeholders, the responsibility of the government, the policymakers, the medical infrastructure, or any of the societal stakeholders. But what I want to urge and talk about to all of you today is what can we do at an individual level to be able to support ourselves as women and to support our fellow women around us as well. Like Dr. Behram mentioned, we start young. It begins with, how the child really bonds with the parent, with the siblings, with the family, with the peers. How do we teach our girls to, look at themselves? How do we teach our girls to look at themselves to be good enough only if they meet a certain amount of conditions? We need to start young to be able to have a non-judgmental approach, an empathic listening approach, and a flexible gender role identity that we can provide with our women, where we can encourage them that they can equally be successful in engineering, in science, and in all the non-male dominating fields as well, as much as the male dominating fields in the workplaces. It's very important that we validate the experiences of women. Something that I often come across in my practice is that a lot of women feel that their partners or their family members sort of don't understand what they go through. And it may not be an abuse or a violence, but it could sometimes be a mere state of feeling negative or just a bad mood. A lot of times women are called as drama queens. Though this may not be something that really defines their behavior completely, but it shouldn't take away the fact that we must give an empathic listening ear to women. It's very important that we as a community, we as a society, learn some things ourselves and don't expect always to learn from the women, especially when it comes to what is important for them. What does equality mean for them? What is sexism? What are gender roles? What is gender equality? These are things that we must responsibly take an action and an initial step to educate ourselves about. It's very important that we as a community, because I think in our communities, we don't live in isolation, like I mentioned initially. So every man is also interacting with a woman, and every woman is also interacting with a man. And it's important that we understand, very important, the concept of consent. Consent is not just there as a crucial component of relationships which are romantic in nature, but consent is something that holds true in existence for each and every individual. So let's be more proactive in learning better about what our fellow women counterparts also want and expect from us as a society as whole. Something that's very important for our young girls is to talk about body positivity, because I think though men are also, a victim to body shaming, because of the given nature of patriarchal setup, women tend to be far more predisposed to the risk of poor and bad body image and body shaming and body concerns. It's important that we learn and help our women learn that it's okay to be who you are unapologetically. There can be many other things that I would like to invite you to think about as well. But some of the last things that I would like to leave you from my end is that we all can, in our individual capacities, take care of our selves as women and also our female counterparts by making public places safer for them, accessible for them, by being simply partner to them, by simply making sure that they can be given that responsibility for making a decision for themselves, to help them maintain and realize that they don't have to take up all the work by themselves, but they can learn to delegate work and not feel guilty about it too. Women can allowed to feel aspirational. Women should be allowed to feel okay to have bigger dreams, because they are equally in right according to our constitution as much as men are. Lastly, I would like to emphasize upon that women need to be there for women. I think from history, we've been hearing about how there is such a dire need for women to stand up for women. And I think that's one of the greatest causes that pulls down the women empowerment cause. So I hope that we all, no matter we are men, no matter we are women, I hope that we all, reject this blind rebellion, but we rather take a very well thought plan of action to deconstruct the existing shackles of systemic control that are actually limiting women's empowerment in today's time. And simply to end for today, I'd like to end with a very powerful quote by L.R. Nost, and I'll read it out for you as you can read it on the screen yourself. The ultimate gift we can give the world is to grow our tiny humans into adult humans who are independent thinkers, compassionate doers, conscious questioners, radical innovators, and passionate peacemakers. Our world doesn't need more adults who blindly serve the powerful because they've been trained to obey authority without question. Our world needs more adults who question and challenge and hold the power accountable. Thank you so much for being patient listeners, and I hope I've been able to do a bit of justice to cover the social aspects of women's mental health in a short period of time.
Thank you so much, Pragya ma'am, once again for the beautiful reminder that it's okay to be unapologetically yourself. That's going to be one of the takeaway for all of us, who are attending today's session. Thank you so much, ma'am. Moving onward, I'll once again take this blissful opportunity to welcome our next esteemed panelist and speaker. She is our very own Dr. Kranti Vora ma'am, the additional professor at IIPHE. Dr. Kranti ma'am is an additional professor and is an accomplished obstetrician and a public health specialist. She has deep experience of dealing with women as patients and as community members at the point in their lives at the intersection of their physical and mental needs. Dear ma'am, the stage is all yours.
Thank you, Starry. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, ma'am. You're audible and visible both.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this great event at IIPHE, and thank you, Neelam and Pragya, especially Pragya, for ending with a great quote. So here I'm going to change the direction a little bit and try to talk a little about how the biology of a woman affects the mental health of women, especially women who are in their 20s and 30s, where our majority of students are. So 20s and 30s are the physiological peak, especially physically, you are in the best of the health. But also it's a risky time because you're becoming independent at that time. You are coming out of shadow of your parents. You are living physically away from your parents, either for jobs or for studies or for whatever else. And these are the times when substance abuse starts or becomes more serious issue. Also, an important aspect of 20s and 30s is sexual responsiveness, and especially as far as women are concerned, having say in safe sex is very important, and reproduction happens many women or majority of women become pregnant around this time. So infertility and pregnancy related problems sort of become an important health issues around this time. So I won't go into details of each and every one. I just wanted to connect the biological aspect of being a woman with mental health and other important aspects of physical health. So normal hormonal fluctuations in estrogen, in other hormones which are released from brain, which are typical female hormones, can cause depression and anxiety, or exacerbate or increase depression or anxiety. And they affect women in their estrogen producing years, which is 15 to 45 years of age, then men and postmenopausal women, which is after 45 years of age. Estrogen is linked to mood disruption because it has impact on the chemical processes that are happening in the brain, especially the area that are responsible for happiness and emotional response to any trigger, be it social, be it personal, or any work related or anything else. And premenstrual syndrome we all know about. I wanted to little bit talk about premenstrual dysphoric disorder and depression or increased chances of having mental health issues due to hormonal changes in a woman's life during certain ages or certain periods. We all know that there are three periods in the life of woman where there are major hormonal changes happening. The first one is adolescence. That is when major hormonal fluctuations happen. The second and childbirth, and the third one is menopause. So these are three of hormonal fluctuations. The chances of depression, anxiety, mental health issues are very high. This is not an excuse for society to say that just because she's a woman and she has uterus, that is the reason why she's behaving funnily. No, this is to understand. This is to know what is happening with the female body and how that impacts mental health, so that the woman can help herself and society can support women during that time. So a little bit about PMDD, which is premenstrual dysphoric disorder. It is similar to PMS, but it is more severe. It ability and tension around just before menstruation starts. Sometimes it can be so difficult to manage that your daily life is disrupted. And women who have anxiety, depression already, they are more likely to have PMDD, and the symptoms exacerbate or increase during this time. There is medical help available for this, where the replacement or other medications which can be taken, and also other supporting like yoga and meditation, those kind of things also can be done. And understand this is what is happening to you. Second period, as I said, was birth and pregnancy. So mothers have this baby blues or postpartum depression, and perinatal depression 6 months, 7 months after delivery, women do undergo depression, and there are more emotional shifts. There is sadness and tiredness, which the society does not understand. Wonderful thing that happens to every woman, and how somebody can be upset or sad about something which she should be very proud of. And the third period is perimenopause, or shift into menopause, where there is a huge hormonal shift happening and which can cause depression and sadness. The other area which I wanted to touch upon, and I think Neelam and Pragya did touch upon a little bit, but I also wanted to touch upon it as in the physical aspect, that young women who experience violence are at high risk of unplanned pregnancy because they don't have control over the sex life, and abortion. And if violence escalates during pregnancy, it can lead to pregnancy complication or miscarriage. There's a case of Aisha which is going on right now, and that is a very good example how violence leads to miscarriage. Along with physical violence, there is emotional violence, and not always it is domestic violence. That could be violence in the workplace, that could be violence when you are studying, from your peers also. So manipulative, where women feel that they are responsible. Like Pragya gave an example that she was responsible for what was going on. She didn't feel that it was violence. So it's really important how we raise our women. And if you feel something off, you feel something is not right, take help from your peers, from your family, or from some responsible entity like. And please go and approach them. Don't think that anything is small and it's not worth reporting. Little bit I wanted to touch upon PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is very common during 20s and 30s, and it's becoming more and more common. It is associated with eating disorders and negative body image, because many girls, they put on weight because of PCOS. There are menstrual symptoms like pain and heavy bleeding. Back pain is also very common, and depression and fatigue, which is related not only to the hormonal changes, but also due to negative body image, weight gain, and other physical issues which are going on with the girl. Again, treatment is available. Consult your doctor, and this is very easy to treat. So don't feel stigmatized if you have PCOS. So lastly, I wanted to end with a positive note that what will help. So in your 20s and 30s, be physically active. Don't think that exercise is for older. Be physically active, eat well, get enough sleep, and try to get outside every day. And this is really important in this era of lockdowns and corona. But be outside responsibly, wear mask and take care. Maintains positive, strong, and supportive relationship. I think Neelam and Pragya have emphasized on this point enough. Keep your brain active, learn a language, do crossword, do something which makes you happy. And we have Starry. I'm really proud of her, the way she takes her reading and book love to the extent where she is on social media, and she is really excited and happy about it, and which makes you happy and which makes you have a better mental health. Strive for balance. It can be difficult, especially if you're studying, you're working, if you're married, if you have kids, but allow time for yourself. And be with people whom you love, and work towards some goals, small goals, big goals, depending upon where you are, what makes you comfortable. It helps because it leads to hopefulness. It makes you hopeful that you will be able to get somewhere. So it could towards the goal. I would that being a woman is something which is very and you should be proud of yourself. Be aware of your body, be aware of your hormones, and seek help whenever you think you need them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for it was really a visual, again, a reminder for all of us, to keep ourselves active, and touching upon some of the very important tips that we could take away, and also for acknowledging me. Thank you so much, ma'am. I always believe that, you following your passion along with your profession is a very important aspect for your mental health. And that's what I've been doing. And literature is one such thing that has helped me to maintain and strike a balance. Thank you so much, ma'am, for your acknowledgement. Now we'll move on to our last panelist and speaker for today. She is Miss Riddhi Doshi. She trains coaches, corporate leaders, educators, parents on issues of mental health and behavior. She is an international certified parenting counselor, a 3 times invited TEDx speaker. She's also the founder of Lajja, a community where women empower each other. She is a child psychologist, and here she is today empowering us with her topic, Ho Jao Zara Matlabi. Dear Riddhi,
thank you so much. Thank you so much. It seems there's some issue with the video, but let me not just wait any time. Thank you, IIPHG. Thank you, Steri, and thank you so much, Dr. Dilip. It's a pleasure being on the panel once again. And yes, good morning to everybody. What my fellow panelists have been talking about, let me add a little to what Dr. Kranti ended with. And the title says it all. So I'm going to put a presentation there for you, and we'll take it up from there. So here it is, and let's talk about it. Okay. So, Zara Matlabi, so important for us women to, understand this. Thoda matlabi hona to banta hai. Why? Because at the end of the day, it is us and our mental health that we are supposed to take care about. So why are we talking about being a little matlabi, right? What does it mean? Do we really love ourselves? I have seen many women since I run India's first forum for women, that's called Lajja. At Lajja, I come across so many women, and their focus and their priority is just their children, their husband, their family, their siblings, their parents, their in-laws, bus. Okay. Do we ever think about us? Do we ever give priority to us? Do we ever think that we are worth a bit of love, a bit of hugs for our own self? Or do we ever give that priority to us that we also need some time for ourselves? Think it over. The easiest way to do is give a tight hug to yourself. What we do is we hug everybody on earth, right from a child to our spouses, to our parents, to our siblings, to all the chota children we see on the road, or probably our relatives' children. We give a hug to them. We also give a hug to maybe a puppy or a chotu baby cat, a kitten, which our neighbor must be having, or we must be owning one. We tend to give a hug to them as well. Where are we? Do we consider ourselves as a priority? Do we ever consider that we are also worth a tight hug? We are standing tall amidst all the, negativity or all the responsibility or all that stuff we are amidst right now. The women are known to be multitasking. And while we are multitasking, it's important that we love ourselves. It's important that we accept ourselves. It's important that we give a tight hug to ourselves and we say, hey, I so love you. Hey, you know what? I'm there for you. It is important in this world of competition. It's important that in the world of, while the world is moving towards AI, we give this validation to our own self that I'm there for you. I love you. And if something goes wrong, I'll be the first to reach out and to support you. Very important. While all the speakers have been talking about mental health and women, it is so important to add self-love a bit to it as well, because this is all we can do. This is all that is in our hands. Moving further, what are the things we do for self-care? Do we sit 5 minutes and spend time with ourselves? Do we sit with a cup of coffee and just do nothing? Do we watch a TV serial for some time and just be with ourselves? Do we go for a walk, not with our friends, but with our own self? Do we go for spa? Do we go for exercise? Do we bake a cake specially for us? Do we go to salons just to pamper ourselves someday, or to spend some time with ourselves? Or do we play a game of chess all alone? Or patience? That's a very famous card game. Do we play that? I want you to think on this perspective today while the world is celebrating Women's Day. Dear women, are you there for your own self? I want you to think on this. Self-care is really very, very important. And one important aspect of self-care is, are you adhering to the time? Are you maintaining a diary? Because maintaining a diary helps you to understand your pattern of emotions and feelings, helps you to streamline your work, helps you to maintain or lower down your stress levels. At least it will not certainly add to your stress. Are we doing that? And last but not least, matlabi ho kya? I don't want you to be self-centered, but certainly I want you to think about self-love. That is so, so important. And remember, being a woman, if you don't love yourself, how would you be able to love other people? How would you be able to support other people? How would you be able to motivate and inspire other people? Our life is just like a bottle of water. If the bottle is filled with water, and if I try to add some more, it will spill, it will overflow. And if the bottle is just khali, kuch bhi nahi hai wo bottle mein, I will really take time to fill that bottle. Women and all that young girls who are there live at the moment, love yourself. Be there for yourself. Inspire yourself and motivate yourself. And all that validation you seek from the outer world, seek from yourself. A small message to all those who are listening, who are live on Facebook, who are here as a part of this webinar. Give a tight hug to yourself in the morning and in the evening before you go to sleep. Be there for yourself and be full of love. Accept yourself, accept your body, accept your emotions, and see how you feel, how positive you feel, how important you feel, because that's the way you're respecting your being. That's the way you're respecting your own self. Thank you so much, and happy Women's Day to all those gorgeous souls who are there live with me at the moment. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Riddhi ma'am. It was indeed like, I remember the quote which talks about, you can definitely not pour from an empty cup. And you definitely showed us ways on how we can be so much filled with love, because only when you're filled with love, you can, share the love to your dear ones and to the world that you were around with. Thank you so much, ma'am, for this Joshila talk. Now we'll move on, dear Reena ma'am, we'll move on to the question and answer session. I've been reading the chats. We have 2 questions. Veena ma'am, would you like to share the questions?
Yes, we are on the question answer session. So let me we have only 2 questions. The first question has come from Shubham, and I think both Pragya and Neelam would be able to answer this one. Shubham asks about the COVID effect on women. So he says that if the world was not prepared for the pandemic, women were in a worse situation because apart from countries crumbling down and the economy collapsing, women were worst hit by the pandemic. So do you all have anything to share about this? Maybe Neelam can go first and then Pragya.
Yes, definitely. I think that's a very relevant question to the contextual times now. Of course, we all know and we all agree that women have differently suffered the pandemic, and how is it different and what made it different. First of all, let us talk a little bit about lockdown. And I think we have got a lot of commercial ads which throw a light on how life of women before lockdown and during lockdown was almost the same. So there was no question of boredom. There was no question of what to do now and how I'm not able to go out. But in fact, this had always been her life, wherein she's taking care of family, she's doing the household chores. Apart from that, another important thing is that I think this was focused a lot when we spoke on mental health in COVID times, was about caring for self, having a me time, having a time out of family, out of responsibility, out of kids, and saving it for ourselves and to grow, to build for ourselves. Now, what has happened is most of the women have not been able to get that time and self care as well. All the time and self care she would have otherwise gotten while her children were out in schools or husband and other family members were out on their job places. This was taken off during lockdown. And the worst hit, the worst impact of that was seen in the violence rate, the domestic violence rates in women in India and worldwide, not just India, I'm sorry. So this is an additional effect of pandemic, lockdown, COVID in general. But we know about the medical attention that women get, which was again even worse during the pandemic, and all other things like economic backdrop, difficulties in workplace, working from home, and difficulties multitasking in these two things. So these were all additional impacts of COVID pandemic on women. I'm sure Pragya has something more to add to it.
I think, Neelam, you've covered pretty much the core answer to the question. I think what I would simply say is that I know we're talking about maybe women specifically, but I think what was also interesting during the pandemic was that though unfortunately there was a lot of increase in rates of violence, abuse, domestic violence in general as well, a lot of children, I think, reported a lot of complaints of sexual abuse, increased physical abuse during the first initial period of the pandemic as well. There was a recent article that spoke about that how 70% of the men that actually took to 70% of people actually rather who took to Kiran, which is the National Mental Health Helpline, were actually men, which I think I just wanted to, I think, add a little bit of that to sort of pitch in a little bit of an interesting dynamic that though I think there was a lot of increase in the incidence of violence and abuse among women, there weren't any considerate amount of increase that was seen in the sort of help that was sought for women, which I think that simply talks about the fact that how there is so much of lack of privilege and lack of access sometimes to get help as well. I think just to put a little bit attention also on women who are less privileged, who do not have independence in their houses, I think they suffered far more because the pandemic became, I think, just another hell breaking loose with, all sorts of abuse and neglect that already existed in the presenting households. Because like how Neelam mentioned that it already, like, it cut their sort of connection to going out, like, stepping out to buying vegetables, to going to the temples, to interacting with maybe, the neighbors or the people in the society. Everything came to a standstill with the pandemic. So definitely, I think that's only that I would like to add, because I think Neelam's pretty much covered everything. That's all.
Thank you, Neelam and Pragya. I wonder if Riddhi may have some local examples. She's from Ahmedabad. She may have some idea about what was happening locally. Riddhi? Okay, we can move to the next question then. We have a question from Nupur for Kranti. Kranti, she asks that how can one differentiate between PMS and back pain starting from 3 to 4 days before the menstrual cycle with mood fluctuations?
So, Nupur, if it is happening around periods, like it is related to menstruation, then chances are it is PMS. And there should be treatment for PMS, either non-medical or medical. Whatever, for the milder one, you can have non-medical. But if it is happening repeatedly around menstruation, PMS.
Kranti, I think we lost your voice at the end.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, so if it is happening around menstruation repeatedly, then most probably it is PMS. It has something to do.
Thank you, Kranti. And our last question is from Dhruv, who is asking about the life of non-binary women. He says that we forget about the non-binary women's sufferings while we boast about changing conservative mindset. When will we be able to overcome stigma associated with queer women? So I wonder, Pragya or Neelam want to take it up.
I don't mind. Neelam, would you like to go ahead first?
Yeah. Of course, it's a very difficult question to address because in India, it's relatively a newer concept. This entire non-binary nature of sexual preferences, queer women, and we are yet to reach there. So I'm not sure if I have really a very good satisfactory answer to your question. We are in a process of it. What I can add to a little bit of your information is that the Indian Psychiatric Society, which is there for around more than 70 years, has recently introduced a task force for LGBTQ community and all those marginalized, differently sexually inclined individuals, not just women, but everyone in that community. And I think that is a promising step and a wake-up call for all other stakeholders to take up this issue more seriously. Pragya,
Sure.
would you like to add something?
Yeah, thank you, Neelam. I think I would address your question in a manner, Dhruv, that I think thank you for the question because it's so important. I think with the paucity of time, I couldn't really speak about when I mentioned LGBTQ, being or having the status of being LGBTQ when it comes to sort of women in social aspects, because the problem is that I think because the LGBTQ community is also a minority community, unfortunately the narrative really gets blurred when it comes to talking about heteronormative societies or just heterosexual women in general as well. I think something as far as my understanding goes is that the existence of non-binary women has been in our country for ages. I think there are a lot of our scriptures that speak about the presence of non-binary women. And the only thing is that the view towards them has always been a lot stigma laden versus what it is becoming now with, I think we've taken little steps, not major steps, when it comes to sort of decriminalization of 377. But I think it's not enough because despite the little bit of efforts that policymakers and governments and social stakeholders have taken to recognize non-binary women in general, there is still a long way to go. Even I think within the community, if we see that non-binary women and lesbians are women that is who are attracted and have romantic relationships with women, tend to suffer far more within the community as compared to their other counterparts in the community as well. So I think as Neelam said that unfortunately we may not have really promising solutions to the question that you are talking about, but one thing that I personally believe in is that to stand up with your own voices whenever, wherever, and however you can, ensuring your security and safety. It's important to build the narrative and I'm very happy to know at least that in our country as well, there are organizations who are very aggressively working towards growing the narrative identity and recognition of women and men, I think both, who fall outside the binary spectrum of gender. So still a long way to go, but hopefully people like you and us with a like-minded mindset can make it grow over the years. So I'd say that.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all your answers to the questions. We'll just go to the vote of thanks now straight away. So they say that it will take another century for us to close the gender gap. And this they are referring to just the wage gap. So I think the other subtler, unconscious forms of othering women may take even longer. Today is a global day. We celebrate the courage and determination of women and girls, past and present, around the globe, who have played an extraordinary role in the history of their countries and communities, and continue to do so in every day in small and big ways. The theme of this year's International Women's Day is Women in Leadership, and the call for this Women's Day is choose to challenge. Challenge the stereotypes, the biases, the inequality. I mean, I'm saying the word inequality. I understand that now there is sort of some discussion about equality, gender equality versus gender neutrality. And it's not really my area, so I don't follow it a lot. So it is my privilege to thank our esteemed speakers, all four of you. Thank you so, so much. From the bottom of my heart, on behalf of IIPHG, all our students who are here, for a fantastic panel. All of you went really deep into your own areas, and it was very helpful. Even for me, it was very helpful, all the things that you said. Many thanks to Starry for gracefully and ably conducting the event. Thanks to the audience for actively listening to our speakers and participating in the question answer session. Thanks a lot, everyone. Thank you. And I would like to declare this event closed. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all.